We're going to have to leave, just so y'all know, we got to leave the temperature here at 65.
Yeah.
Because of the instruments.
Instruments need to stay. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we're live. I'm doing live right here via my phone. I can see comments, so let me know if you can hear me on here. I know you guys can hear me in here, but I don't need comments from peanut gallery people in here. I need them online if anybody watches at this point. I'm not sure. I think it's not showing me that there's no volume, but I don't know. At any rate, we have been in Nehemiah, and Nehemiah is the third of the three individuals that were bringing groups back into Jerusalem, from into Judah to Jerusalem to rebuild. They have gotten they came to the point where the wall was rebuilt. 52 days. They rebuilt all of this, which was an amazing story in and of itself. That it took that they got it done that quickly, and then they began reading the law, the words of the law. Ezra read out of the book of the law every day. They had all this was going on that people had not heard. You're talking about a whole group of people that's been in captivity. They've not been exposed. Okay, moving something around downstairs. They might be moving the ping pong table. I told them, I was out, took something down a while ago, and I said, look, if you're going to make a lot of noise, which I don't care, stay over there in that corner. Because if you come over here, we hear everything. Under the ping pong, where the ping pong table is, we hear everything that's going on. So that may be them moving, getting it out from underneath us right here, which is fine too. I told them, said, y'all be quiet down here. And I was looking dead on at Sydney. And she's just sitting there and she said, I think he's joking. I think he's kidding y'all. I'm not sure. I think he's joking. So then I said, if you do, I don't care if you make noise, but stay on that side over there if you're going to be loud. Because we do hear you over here when you come. At any rate. So they've been reading, and now they're going. I've been talking about the various prayers. There were numerous prayers that were given. Some of them were, as I would say, parenthetical prayers, where they're talking about what's going on, and then Nehemiah goes, "Oh Lord, remember them for this, or remember me for this, or whatever it may be." Just a quick prayer. His second prayer early on in the letter was that what I termed as a popcorn prayer, where the King Artaxerxes says, why are you sad? And he said, so I prayed and told him what was going on. So there's the big prayers, small prayers. Right when you get to chapter 9, where we are, it comes to the 8th prayer that is prayed. But this is a blessing prayer, or whatever they're praying. They're asking God to forgive them as a nation. And this is not Nehemiah's prayer. This is the priest prayer. The Levites stand up and they're offering this, and they're telling everybody to stand up and bless the Lord and Lord your God from everlasting to everlasting. And then they go into this long prayer. So this is a major prayer that's being prayed right here. They're giving praise to God. They're talking about everything that the Lord has done for them, even through captivity, all the things that have been going on. So this is a major prayer that they're praying, and it just goes on. It just keeps going on through chapter 9. I'll tell you guys, I'm so unused to turning pages, and I read my Bible through here and make notes and mark in there. I'm so used to doing just the flipping, going through with a scan reading in my tablet that I don't see my fingers don't want to turn the pages. And so then after chapter 9, they're kind of done in that praying, and in view of all, it says the last thing there that they were making a binding agreement in writing on a sealed document containing the names of our leaders, Levites, and priests. So they've decided the temple is done, the walls are done, celebration is about to take place, all this is happening. They're praying, God bless this again. We're sorry as a nation for what we've done. And so now they're putting everybody's name down. It's like signing the contract that we're going to be your people. We're going to follow you. We're going to do what you want. And so they make these vows to the Lord. Now, I think if I'm looking at the details of this, you get into chapter 10. Corey, are you there? You want to start at verse 30 on that one. Verse 31, 30 and 31. Read those.
30 and 31?
Yes, sir.
We promise not to give our daughters in marriage to the peoples around us or take their daughters for ourselves. When the neighboring peoples bring merchandise or grain to sell on the Sabbath, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or on any holy day. Every seventh year we will forego working in the land and will cancel all debts.
Okay. All right. So here's the deal. This is kind of the beginning of the details of the vows that they're making. What I want to make note of right there specifically is the first thing that you read in here, where we will not give our daughters in marriage to the surrounding people and will not take their daughters as wives for our sons. This is probably one of the first things that happens when that takes place. They begin to mix in, intermingle with the other nations around them. This is one of the problems that they've had while they've been in captivity. And so now they're back, but this is one of the things done. But when we get to the end of Nehemiah, it was the same thing when we were at the end of Ezra. Now the storyline of Ezra and Nehemiah are kind of, in this point right here, they're kind of flowing together. They're happening virtually at the same time. Ezra is there, he's reading. We read in Ezra where he stood and read the scripture. Here we see where he's been reading. And then they begin to make vows. One of the last things that, if we remember, one of the last things that was in Ezra was there were men of the Israelites who had married foreign women, and some of them had children as well. And Ezra made them make a vow to send those women away. And so that's what they did. So my point of it is, when you're in Nehemiah, one of the things after the wall has been rebuilt, after the words of the law have been read, one of the first details of the vows they're making as a people is, we will not marry foreign women. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to be one of the first things they say we're not going to do. This is also one of the, if you remember, if I go way back in there, when Joshua is about to take over, I'm reading through Deuteronomy right now in my personal reading. And as I'm reading through Deuteronomy, Moses is giving them the instructions. And one of the main instructions that he's given them, Jeremy, is don't intermarry with the foreigners of the land, because the main reason for that is that they will influence you to worship their gods, which is going to happen when they get all settled and all this, and that's going to happen. It's going to take place. It's one of the first things they were told not to do when they're coming back to rebuild the land after their 70 years of being in captivity. One of the first vows they make is not going to marry the foreign women. And the reason for that is simply because of the worship of the false gods. Because there's going to be the introduction of false religions that are going to be there. And so they're giving this, and they're imposing commands on themselves as well. They're going to honor supporting the church, so to speak. They're going to give their money is supposed to be given. They're going to give their bread. They're going to do all the things that are there. They're going to be doing all those things that are going to be happening. And so all this is there. They're going to cast lots among the priests, the Levites, and people for donations of wood to be used in the temple for burning firewood, for keeping the fire altars burning. Because they're to bring the wood to our God's house, to burn it on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. There's just a whole lot of things they're going to be doing. They're making all these agreements that's going to happen. They're going to do this, they're going to do this, they're going to do this. Basically, it's going to be the same agreements that they had originally had made when they were coming, before they ever were taking the land to begin with. We're reestablishing the covenant agreements that we had made during the time of Moses, the time of Joshua, before we entered the land. They failed to keep all those agreements, and now we're going to go again. They had failed to keep all those agreements in the time of the Judges. All the problems that ensued from that, they failed to keep. The Israelites, I don't know why these are God's chosen people, why they're special. Because they spent more time disobeying, and maybe we all do. Forgive me, Lord. Maybe we all do that same thing. But we're hearing and seeing all the things right here that they are agreeing to right here. From the marriage aspect of it, to the tenth of giving of the oil and the first fruits of their crops, the firstborn of their livestock and family, the things the priests are supposed to do, the Levites are supposed to do, all of that. They're saying we're going to get back into it. We're going to follow the guidelines. Now remember, this group that's making the vows right here have never made these before. They're coming out of captivity, 70 years of captivity. So the vast majority, if not all, of these individuals that are doing this, remember, they hadn't heard the words of the law. The law had not been, the books were there. The books of the law didn't go with them to Babylon. So you have a whole group of people. Just think about it. It's like, I know this is kind of hard to imagine, but it's like starting a brand new church of people that have never had a Bible in their hands. Now, you and I can't fathom that thought. That's hard to imagine that we've never had one. But here it is, a group of people who are standing and weeping because they're hearing the word of God, rather than some of the ritualistic things that maybe they were participating in during captivity, rather than seeing the practice of the false gods from the Babylonian Empire, all those things. Now they're hearing what God had spoken to them as a people. So they've not heard this before. And so they're going, okay, we're going to follow those guidelines. We're going to follow the rules. They're hearing, Ezra is reading what Moses had written, and now they're hearing all these things that they had basically had no idea about. They didn't know it was there. It's what happened during the period of the kings, before all of this took place. During the kings, when Josiah was king, at one point they found the book that had been read. Josiah got it out, called all the people together. They read the book, and the people wept over it, because they had never heard the thing before. And it's like a whole new world is being opened up to these people because they've not heard any of these things. So they're making these vows. They're making these promises. This is how we're going to live. This is what we're going to do. And all this comes, now when you get to chapter 11, they're resettling Jerusalem. And when I mean resettling, there's descendants from each of the 12 tribes. Now, when I say that, each of the 12 tribes, there are some from different places, although it's just in Judah that they are establishing. Remember, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom are gone. They're lost. They're gone completely. So when we say there's a remnant here, there is a remnant of people, but it's the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites. And the Levites don't have an inheritance of land because they belong to the Lord. Their work belongs to the Lord. They don't get an inheritance of land, but land is given to them. Property is given to them. They receive when I'm trying to wrap my brain around this, because they talk about bringing the first fruits of your labor, bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the animals, bringing in all this, the sacrifices that are being made. This is on a daily basis. So sacrifices are being made on a daily basis. That's a lot of meat that's being charred, being burned, being cooked, basically. The shoulder and the parts, other stomach parts, their various things are given to the priest and to the Levites. That's their food. You bring it in. It's got to go somewhere. And I was thinking about this Bill, whenever Solomon became king, he held a festival, so to speak, for 14 days. And if you read about all the sacrifices that were made, they were sacrificing thousands of animals during his 14 days. And I'm reading that going, where's all that going? Are they eating? I mean, because it's part of that's food it's to be given to the priest. It's to be given to the Levites, because their inheritance is from the Lord, not from land. They're receiving from the Lord. So this is one of those things that it goes through my mind when I'm trying to think. How often, they cried for meat when they're 40 years in the wilderness. I'm sure they're not crying for meat once they're in Jerusalem, once they're settled, because every day sacrifices are being made. And there are provisions, there are guidelines for every sacrifice, and it's just a constant flow of meat and grain and oil and all these. It's just a constant thing that's coming into the temple to be offered, and it's all got to go somewhere. But what you have right here, you have these descendants. You're giving us the names of all these descendants of Judah and these descendants of Benjamin and the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers. All these individuals that are here, that are part of the reestablishment of Jerusalem. And it's more than just they're casting lots for who's going to live in the city and who's going to live on land outside of the city. Remember, they're coming from captivity, so nobody has anything. Nobody owns anything here. Nobody has, there are no rights of ownership. You go on vacation, you come back, and you still got your same house. Or at least you're supposed to have. Maybe your same land. You own so much property right there. But these people coming from captivity don't have anything. So they're casting lots of who's going to live in the city and who's going to live outside in the country. Who's going to take care of the vineyards? Who's going to take care of that? All those things. They're having to decide all of these things now. And so that's part of what the latter part of this story is about. Now, at some point right here, Nehemiah leaves, goes back home. He goes back to King Artaxerxes. But here we are. Let's look at chapter 12 right here, beginning in verse 27. They're going to have the dedication of the wall. So this for me, this is kind of an interesting thing what they do. This is why I talk about how big the wall is. It's not just a small walkway type, small narrow thing. It's wide. It's wide enough to run a chariot down through there if they needed to. It's wide enough for armies to be on top of it to protect the city. It's wide enough. It's wide as this, these pews right here. It's wide. And so what they do, they're sending for the Levites. The singers are gathering together from the various regions. Everybody's coming together. They're purifying themselves. And beginning in verse 31, Bill, look at chapter 12, verse 31, and just a couple of verses there.
And then I brought up the princes of Judah upon the wall, and appointed 2 great companies of them that gave thanks. Whereof one went on the right hand upon the wall toward the dome gate, and after them went Hosea and half of the princes of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, and Masuda, Judah, and Benjamin, and Shemaiah, and Jeremiah.
Yeah, might as well read those names. You might as well read.
I'm sorry?
You might as well have your turn reading names as well. You know, get all these names in here. So what he's saying is that there's whole one group that goes to the right, one group goes to the left. So they put one group going this way, one group going this way, and what they're going to do, they're just going to start. They're going to go around, and then they're going to meet in the middle, so to speak. They're going to go all the way around Jerusalem, around the walls there. So all this is happening, and you know they're giving thanksgiving. They're blowing the trumpets. They're singing the songs. They're doing all this stuff. They're praising the Lord for this. And then you get to verse 40. Now, Corey, pick that one back up at verse 40 right there. We don't have to read. You don't have to read 41, 42 because that's just nothing. That's just names. So read verse 40.
The two choirs that gave thanks then took their places in the house of God. So did I, together with half the officials.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what they did. They started out with a parade, going two different directions, coming back around, meeting at the temple. Then they take their place at the temple to start praising the Lord there as well. So there's a lot that's going on, a lot of things that are happening. The singers, down the latter part of verse 42, the singers sang with Jezreiah as the leader. On that day they offered, here it is again, they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced because God had given them great joy. The women and the children also celebrated, and Jerusalem's rejoicing was heard far away. So it was a big old celebration that's taking place. And then it continued on. I mean, it continued on. Zerubbabel and his group that he had brought, Ezra and his group, Nehemiah's group. There's like 50,000 people that are here, that are living here, and they're all celebrating. All this is going on at the same time. So when you get into chapter 13, we're kind of finishing out. At that time, the book of Moses was read publicly to the people again. And the command was found written in it that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, because they did not meet the Israelites with food and water. Instead, they hired Balaam against them to curse them. But our God turned the curse into a blessing. So you move down to verse 6 of chapter 13, where it says, while all this was happening, I was not in Jerusalem, because I had returned to King Artaxerxes of Babylon in the 32nd year of his reign. It was only later that I asked the king for a leave of absence so I could return to Jerusalem. Then I discovered the evil Eliashib had done on behalf of Tobiah. Tobiah was one of the enemies of having the wall rebuilt. But Eliashib and Tobiah are kin by their children marrying each other. And he had provided Tobiah a room in the church. So when he wanted to come and visit, he was in the church. He could stay there. He said, pick it up, Corey, right there in verse 8. Just read a couple of verses there.
I was greatly displeased and threw all of Tobiah's household goods out of the room. I gave orders to purify the rooms, and then I put back into them the equipment of the house of God with the grain offerings and the incense.
Go ahead, one more.
I also learned that the portions assigned to the Levites had not been given to them, and that all the Levites and musicians responsible for the service had gone back to their own field.
Okay. So even though I think there's about a 12-year, there's a few years of separation from the time that Nehemiah went back to King Artaxerxes before he came back. There's a few years that are taking place here. And so while he's gone, remember the vows that we've read, talked about? Here we promise we're going to do this, we're going to do this. While Nehemiah's gone, things just begin to go to pot. They start falling apart right here. So when he comes back, he first of all learns that one of the enemies of building the wall, of restoring Jerusalem, is living there inside the church. He's been given a room. Eliashib is the high priest, and he's allowed a room to be done. So no. I also learned that the Levites, remember, their portion is from the Lord. What the offerings that are brought in, everything that's come in, they're receiving a portion there. They've gone back home because they got to make it a living. They got to figure out how to eat. because nobody's bringing in their offering. Nobody's bringing in their sacrifices. They're not doing the things they're supposed to be doing. Therefore, he says in verse 11, I rebuke the officials. Why has the house of God been neglected? That was a key thing. Go back and build the house of God to get it going again. I gathered the Levites and singers together and stationed them at their post. Then all Judah brought 1/10 of the grain, new wine, and fresh oil into the storehouses. I appointed as treasurers over the storehouses the priests. We're going to read all those because they were considered trustworthy. They were responsible for the distribution of the colleagues. 9th prayer. Remember me for this, my God, and don't erase the deeds of faithful love I have done for the house of my God for its services. Just another quick prayer. To me, again, that's one of those, to me, it's a parenthetical prayer. Let's bring just kind of here's what all I've been doing. Here's all we had to do. God, remember me for this. And so they go on. Go on further. He's straightening up a lot of things that they have done. You get to verse 17, he's rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, because they're charging interest or they're holding people captive for payments on things. All this is there. He said, you can't do this. You give the money back. You take care. You don't charge. All the things he said you're supposed to do. What you said you would do. This is how you're supposed to do things. You're cheating people. You're lording over them. That's not what's supposed to happen. And then you get to verse 22. Then I instructed the Levites to purify themselves and guard the city gates in order to keep the Sabbath day holy. What was happening is that they were allowing people to come in and buy stuff and sell things on the Sabbath, which was not supposed to be done. The Lord told them that. That was one of the instructions that came even when Moses was there, not to honor the Sabbath, to keep it holy. Nobody's supposed to come in or out to buy things. And so Nehemiah posts guards. Close the gates. Don't open the gates until after the Sabbath is over. By the way, in the scripture reading, the day always begins in the evening. Okay? Because in the scripture, you always, if you read through there where they talk about at the breaking of day, like the Sabbath is over or whatever, Scripture always moves from darkness to light. In the Hebrew culture, it always moves from darkness to light. It never moves from light to darkness. It always moves. We don't think about it in those terms because we start our day starts at 12:01 a.m., goes through the day and then into the night. But in the Hebrew culture, it starts at like 6 p.m. till 6 p.m. the next day. So it moves. It always moves from darkness to light. So when you read through the Old Testament and they talk about even in the when Jesus was crucified, they got him off the cross before the Sabbath started. And the Sabbath started that evening. So they got him off and got him buried. And they didn't come to anoint him till after the Sabbath was completely over with, which was at daybreak of the day afterwards.
So that's why in the first chapter of Genesis, it's always talking about, it says the evening and the morning were the first day and the second
Yes,
day.
exactly. It's exactly right. Because it always moves from darkness to light. It's just who represents darkness. We're called to be children of light, not children of darkness. We're called to follow the light. You find it from Genesis through Revelation. It's all the way through there. And when it deals with darkness and light. Evening time begins, when it's as in the creation, even in the creation story. Darkness moves to light to the next day. So that's sidebar fact or interesting note that's there. So when he says this, after he tells them to lock the gates, when you get to, make sure I have this right, verse 22, the 10th prayer. Remember me for this also, my God, and look on me with compassion according to the abundance of your faithful love. another prayer. Nehemiah has 12 prayers in here. And we're almost done with Nehemiah completely, and then you start in verse 23. Bill, you want to read? Would you read that right there?
23.
Read 23 and 24.
In those days also saw I Jews that had married wives of
Ashdod.
of Ammon, and of Moab. And their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people.
Yeah. This coincides with Ezra. When Ezra discovered that the men had married women from other places, and now they were brought in. And so he found them. Now he tells them right there that I rebuked them, cursed them, beat some of their men, and pulled out their hair. Now, I don't know about you, Jeremy, but I'm probably not going to try to hang around for that to happen to me, if at all possible. But I'm sure that with Nehemiah, probably had his army with him, whoever they may be. And he said, I forced them to take an oath before God and said, you must not give your daughters in marriage to their sons, or take their daughters as wives for your sons or yourselves. Then he mentions King Solomon. And you know the story of King Solomon, how many wives he had, and that was his downfall, being led astray by the gods of his many different wives there. And so he tells them, this is what you've got to do. You got to get rid of them. And then you get to verse 29. Remember them, my God, for defiling the priesthood, as well as the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Another prayer, another last prayer. And so he said, I purified them there. Corey, pick that up, verse 30 and 31. Yeah, just finish it off.
Okay, so I purified the priests and the Levites of everything foreign, and assigned them duties, each to his own task. I also made provision for contributions of wood at designated times, and for the first fruits. Remember me with favor, my God. Last prayer.
12th, that's the 12th prayer of the story that's going on there. So, yeah, he left for a while. We were also reading here that maybe it's Artaxerxes appoints him as governor here in Jerusalem, because he spends 12 years here in Jerusalem. And I believe it's at this second point that he does this, so he stays there for a while. At any rate, it is Nehemiah is an interesting story, to say the least. Guys, preachers preach on Nehemiah a lot. I have, and even in here, I have preached out of Nehemiah as well. So it's an interesting story of what takes place. That's the last part of the rebuilding or the return of the people from captivity. With those three that's taking place, we don't have the story of Zerubbabel, but he brings the first group. We have the story of Ezra and the story of Nehemiah and all that's happening there, and everything that the people promised to do, the reading of the law, the failure of the people to keep the law, and the work at Nehemiah to try to restore people to what God's law was all about. Any thoughts? Any questions about that? About Nehemiah? I like reading that one. I like reading Nehemiah. Part of it I scan read because it's too many names. But when you read the storyline of what's going on through there, it's pretty interesting what takes place. All right. I'm not going to start Esther. I could do Esther pretty quick, but I want to give her a little bit of time right there. If I'm looking at Esther, we'll talk about it next time. But the big thing in there, you read through Esther, you really don't read. You read about the nation of people, but there's no mention of God in that story. It's about the people. And so I don't really know what the reasoning, justification was for Esther being in there. But there's a story. And the big story is that out of Esther is such a time as this is the main story, main verse that comes out of that scripture. But it's a pretty interesting story. I read Esther this afternoon, just reading through it, just in case I got to that point tonight. So, anything else before we close out? I've got 26 after, close enough. We can shut it down. Y'all can go find Gus and see what he's doing, why he, what if he's got all the cups washed and such to be washed, and whatever there. Thanks, guys, for being here. Thanks for being online with us. I see Debbie was with us tonight, so there was two on there now. Miss Mary, I believe, was on there as well. So grateful to have y'all with us tonight. This is my little cheap version of being able to do the online thing instead of the big upstairs thing. I just did it with my phone, so I hope it worked. See you all. Guys, let's stand together, and I'm going to shut this one off. Finish.